Alright, so this is the second and third night of John Perry's book. And to start off with the questions, the one that I got from the note lecture, also the video lecture, was notice how the group seems to fail to recognize that our brain is part of our physical bodies. That is not simply our bones and our muscles that will eventually deteriorate after we die, but our organs as well as including our brains, given we know of her view and how Gretchen would respond if presented to this insight. Is she already taking this into account, and please explain? Um, and I argued that maybe this is the death factor that she's facing right now, but part of me thinks that if Gretchen were to really sit down and realize that just like the rest of her body, just like her bones, her muscles, her skin, everything will deteriorate as well as her brain. But I still feel like she'd be in denial. I feel like that's just the type of person she is, and maybe that's because I'm not fully understanding who she is and her values. But that's just what I get from Gretchen herself. Um, she does think in a much more complex manner than I do, so I couldn't exactly tell you what she would say, but I know for a fact she would definitely question where this idea came from, and she would continue to question for some factual backup. But again, that's just the way that I perceive her, and I don't necessarily think that she's really thinking this whole thing through. And I don't think Gretchen is taking into account the fact that everything will decay. I think she's more focused on taking Gretchen and Gretchen's memories with her wherever she goes beyond this death point, wherever she believes she'll go beyond this death point. But I think that's all she's really thinking and all that she's really focused about. She is such a deep thinker, but I think that her thinking only goes so deep, and once it goes so deep, to her realization that that's as far as it goes for her, then I think she's done thinking, and she's very close-minded after that, and pushes away any ideas, which is why it's so hard for the team to communicate with her and to make her think of the other possibilities. And just as a little foreshadowing into the third night, I think had she acknowledged this, she might be more optimistic and more open to taking Dr. Matthews' idea of the potential brain and body transplant. But that's just me. And then continuing on to the third night's question, which is, what is the conception of identity? Or at least my opinion of the conception of identity. And I said that your identity is made up of your feelings, of your memories, of your morals, which for me really has shaped a lot of my identity, and just the morals that I've grown up in, the morals that have been instilled in me, just not from my parents, from my peers too. But I also agree with the continuity. And the more that I begin to think about Dr. Matthews' offer, and the more that I begin to think about the Who's Julia situation, the more that it actually made me get into this question a little deeper. And so to continue with the identity questions, speaking of, does conception, survive bodily death? How? And we're supposed to mesh that with survival. And I wrote that just from what I've grown up in knowing, yes, your identity survives your bodily death. In the Who's Julia example, I would argue with the Supreme Court that someone who was once Mary Frances is now Julia. Just because of who's in the body. You can look like someone but completely act like someone different. And I actually pulled in a modern day example. This past weekend I went and watched the movie Split. And in case you haven't seen the trailer or haven't seen the movie at all, this one man who is known as Kevin actually has 24 different personalities in him, not including his actual Kevin personality. And these 24 different identities have different feelings, they have different thoughts, they have different morals, they have different memories, which blows my mind. Yet they all share the same exact body. However, not one identity identifies as the main person. There's Hedwig, there's Barry, there's Jade, and then in the end you find out that there's the Beast, and they all have completely different morals and completely different values. However, when it is time for Kevin to die, which he does not in the movie, but I'm just predicting here, when it's time for him to die, I believe that all those identities will die with him. I don't know how that's going to break up in his body, just because I'm not someone who has split personalities. But this is such a controversial topic that I'm not well versed in, and so I hope a lot of this makes sense.